There is a good chance you have $55 hiding somewhere in your weekly spending right now. Not in your rent, not in your car payment, not in your electric bill. I mean $55 that quietly disappears through little purchases you barely remember making. Maybe it is 2 DoorDash orders, a couple of drive-through lunches, a few Starbucks runs, that random Amazon purchase that looked like a great idea at 10:47 on a Tuesday night. Or maybe it is just $5 here, $8 there, $12 somewhere else until Friday arrives and you have absolutely no idea where the money went. Now imagine taking that same $55 and doing something completely different with it. Instead of letting it disappear, you send it toward your future. Every single week, automatically, quietly, without trying to become some extreme couponer or giving up every little thing that makes life enjoyable. And that tiny decision could become one of the most powerful money habits you ever build. It sounds almost too simple. That is exactly why most people overlook it. Let me explain. I'm Della, and on this channel, we simplify investing, personal finance, and wealth building so you can make smarter financial decisions without needing a finance degree. So let's talk about the $55 rule. The rule is incredibly simple. You take $55 every week and move it out of your checking account before you have a chance to spend it. Then you put that money into a long-term investment designed to grow with the economy. You do it whether the stock market is having a fantastic week or getting crushed. You do it when your paycheck feels comfortable. And you do it when life feels a little tight. The goal isn't to predict the market. It isn't to find the next Tesla. It isn't to become a day trader sitting in your basement watching green and red candles all day. It is much more boring than that. And that is precisely the point. You are building a machine that works whether you feel motivated or not. Because motivation is unreliable. Automation is not. Think about what $55 actually means in everyday American life. $55 a week is about $7.86 a day. That is less than many Americans casually spend on lunch. It could be a couple of coffees and a snack. It could be one takeout meal. It could be a few convenience purchases at Target that somehow turn into $63 at checkout. And that is where this rule becomes psychologically powerful. Your brain treats $55 differently from $550. If somebody asked you to find an extra $550 this month, you would probably start looking at your budget very carefully. You would check your rent, your utilities, your car payment, your insurance. You might start wondering what subscription you can cancel. But $55? Your brain barely sounds the alarm. And that is the loophole. Small amounts can slip through your budget almost completely unnoticed. The problem is that those small amounts do not stay small when they repeat for years. $55 once doesn't change your life. $55 every week for decades is a completely different story. Because $55 a week becomes about $2,860 over a year. That is real money. And yet, psychologically, it never feels like $2,860. You don't have to come up with $2,860 on January 1st. You simply make one small decision every week. That difference matters. Because wealth is often built through behaviors that feel almost too small to matter while you're doing them. Think about someone who earns $70,000 a year. They get paid every 2 weeks. Their paycheck arrives. The mortgage or rent gets paid. The car payment comes out. The grocery bill happens. The phone bill happens. Insurance happens. Then life happens. A birthday comes up. The kids need something for school. The car needs tires. The dog needs a vet visit. And somehow the money that looked perfectly adequate 2 weeks earlier is gone. So they tell themselves the same thing millions of Americans tell themselves. I'll start investing when I make more. But then they get a raise. And what happens? Their lifestyle grows right alongside their paycheck. The apartment gets upgraded. The car gets upgraded. The restaurants get nicer. The vacations get bigger. The monthly subscriptions multiply. And somehow they are still waiting for that magical moment when they finally have extra money. Here is the uncomfortable truth. For most people, that moment never arrives. Because extra money doesn't automatically create wealth. A system does. And the $55 rule is really a system disguised as a tiny number. You are telling your money where to go before your lifestyle gets a chance to claim it. And there is another reason this works. It creates separation between the money you live on today and the money you are building for tomorrow. Imagine your checking account as a bucket. Every payday, money pours into the bucket. Then your bills poke holes in the bottom. Rent, groceries, gas, insurance, entertainment, shopping, and whatever is left gets absorbed by everyday life. Now imagine taking $55 off the top before any of those leaks can touch it. You move it somewhere else. A place where it has one job: grow. That $55 no longer has to compete with your Friday night dinner. It doesn't have to compete with the new pair of shoes. It doesn't have to compete with the latest phone upgrade. It has already been assigned a mission: your future. And once you make that transfer automatic, something strange happens. You stop missing the money. This is one of the most important lessons in personal finance. People often think saving requires tremendous discipline. Sometimes it does. But the smarter strategy is to design your finances so you don't need tremendous discipline every single week. If your investment contribution depends on you remembering to do it, eventually you will forget. If it depends on you feeling motivated, eventually you won't feel motivated. If it depends on having money left over at the end of the month, something will probably come up before the month ends. But if $55 leaves your account automatically, now the decision has already been made. You simply live on what remains. And that is where the $55 rule starts becoming powerful. Because underneath this tiny weekly habit is something much bigger: compounding. Most people have heard the word. They know it has something to do with investing. But hearing about compounding and actually understanding what it can do to your money are two completely different things. Compounding means your money can generate returns, and those returns can then generate additional returns. Your money starts working. Then the money your money earns starts working too. And eventually, the growth can become much larger than the amount you originally put in. But there is a catch. Compounding is incredibly impatient with impatient people. At the beginning, it looks almost useless. You put in your $55. Then another $55. Then another. A few months pass. You check the account. And you might think, that's it? Exactly. That's it. At first, the early stage is supposed to feel boring. You are building the foundation before anyone can see the house. This is where most people make their biggest mistake. They expect their money to become impressive immediately. They invest for 6 months. They don't see a fortune. So they stop. They try another strategy. They chase a hot stock. They buy something their friend says is about to explode. They move their money around. They start over. And they never give compounding the one thing it needs most: time. Think about planting an apple tree. You don't plant a seed on Monday and dig it up on Friday because there aren't any apples. You water it. You protect it. You give it time. For years, it may look like almost nothing is happening. Then one day, the tree is producing more than you ever imagined. Investing works in a surprisingly similar way. The beginning is about your contributions. Later, the growth starts contributing too. And eventually, the growth can become the biggest worker in the entire system. That is why the $55 number isn't really the story. The real story is what happens when a small amount gets repeated for a very long time. Because $55 once is spending money. $55 every week is a habit. And $55 every week invested for decades? That can become an entirely different financial life. And here's where things get really interesting. Because if you are thinking, okay, Della, but $55 a week doesn't sound like enough to make me wealthy. I understand. That is exactly what I want you to think right now. Now we're going to put actual numbers behind this rule and see what happens when that $55 gets decades of time to work. And the difference between simply saving that money and actually investing it is where this little rule starts getting very, very interesting. The goal isn't to become rich overnight. The goal is to make sure that 20 or 30 years from now, you look back and realize that the tiny decision you barely noticed became one of the biggest financial decisions you ever made. Now let's put some real numbers behind this, because this is where the $55 rule stops sounding like a cute budgeting trick and starts looking like a serious wealth-building strategy. If you invest $55 every week, you're putting away about $2,860 a year. Do that for 10 years, and you've contributed roughly $28,600 of your own money. That's already a meaningful amount. But now imagine that money is invested instead of sitting in a checking account. Assuming a hypothetical 10% average annual return, your account could grow to roughly $46,000 after those 10 years. Notice what happened. You put in about $28,600. The market potentially added another $17,000 or so. And you didn't have to work a second job to create that extra money. You simply gave your original money somewhere productive to go. Now let's stretch the timeline. 20 years. You have contributed around $57,200. At that same hypothetical 10% average return, your account could grow to roughly $171,000. Think about that for a second. You didn't contribute $171,000. You contributed $57,200. The rest came from growth. And this is where most people underestimate investing. They look at the amount they can afford to contribute today and assume that is basically the size of their future. It isn't. Your contribution is only the seed. Time is what allows the seed to become something much larger. Now let's go even further. 30 years. Your total contributions would be around $85,800. At a hypothetical 10% average annual return, that $55 a week habit could grow to roughly $460,000. And suddenly, we're not talking about coffee money anymore. We're talking about a potentially life-changing retirement cushion. But let's be even more conservative. Nobody should build their financial future assuming the market will deliver exactly 10% every year. It won't. Some years will be fantastic. Some years will be ugly. Some years could be deeply negative. So let's use a hypothetical 7% annual return instead. At 7%, $55 a week for 30 years could grow to roughly $290,000. Again, you contributed around $85,800. The difference is the power of compounding. And this is why I want you to stop thinking about $55 as $55. Think about it as a tiny employee you send to work every Friday. Your $55 goes into the market. Then it starts working. And eventually, the money that employee earns starts hiring employees of its own. That's compounding. Your original dollars create new dollars. Those dollars create more dollars. And the process keeps repeating. You don't have to personally supervise every dollar. You just have to keep showing up. Now here's something that makes this even more interesting for Americans. You don't necessarily have to invest this money in a regular taxable brokerage account. Depending on your situation and eligibility, retirement accounts can give your money additional tax advantages. For example, you might have access to a 401k through your employer. Your employer may even offer a matching contribution. And if you have a match available, you want to understand it before ignoring it. Because an employer match can effectively add money to your retirement savings without requiring you to earn that additional money yourself. Let's say your employer offers a match on part of your contribution. You contribute. They contribute too. That's an opportunity worth investigating. And if you have a Roth 401k option, or you're eligible to contribute to a Roth IRA, you also have another important choice to understand. With a Roth IRA, you generally contribute money you've already paid income tax on. Then, if you follow the applicable rules, qualified withdrawals in retirement can be tax-free. That is a very different setup from a traditional retirement account, where contributions may receive a tax deduction today and withdrawals are generally taxed later. The point isn't that one account is always better for everyone. Your income, tax bracket, employer plan, age, and retirement goals all matter. The point is that where you put your $55 can matter almost as much as whether you save it. Because building wealth isn't just about making money. It's about keeping more of the money you make. And taxes are one of the biggest expenses you can overlook when you're thinking about long-term wealth. Imagine two people who both invest $55 a week. They make the same contributions. They earn the same investment returns. But one person uses an account with favorable tax treatment and the other keeps everything in a taxable account. Their final results can be very different depending on the investments, tax rates, and how and when the money is withdrawn. That's why personal finance is personal. There is no magic account that everyone should blindly use. But there is a principle almost everyone can understand. Don't just ask where your money can grow. Ask where it can grow efficiently. Now let's talk about what you're actually buying. Because when I say, invest your $55, I don't mean you should randomly open a brokerage account and start buying whatever stock is trending on TikTok. That's not a wealth-building system. That's speculation. The basic strategy behind this rule is much simpler. You want broad diversification. Instead of betting your future on one company, you can use a broad market index fund that owns pieces of hundreds or even thousands of companies. Think about what that means. You don't have to figure out which American company will dominate 10 years from now. You don't have to predict which company will invent the next breakthrough. You don't have to know whether a particular CEO will make the right decision. You own a slice of a broad collection of businesses. Some companies will struggle. Some will disappear. Others will grow. The index can adjust over time. That's one reason broad index investing has become such a popular long-term strategy. You're essentially saying, I don't know which company will win. I believe American businesses and the broader economy can continue creating value over the long run, and I want to participate. That is a completely different mindset from trying to get rich by finding the next hot stock. And it fits perfectly with the $55 rule. Because this strategy isn't built around prediction. It's built around consistency. You invest when the market is rising. You invest when the market is falling. You invest when the headlines are exciting. You invest when the headlines are terrifying. You keep buying according to your plan. This approach also has a name you may have heard before. Dollar cost averaging. The idea is simple. You invest a fixed amount on a regular schedule instead of trying to guess the perfect moment to enter the market. Sometimes your $55 buys more shares. Sometimes it buys fewer. When prices are lower, your fixed contribution buys more shares. When prices are higher, it buys fewer. You aren't trying to outsmart the market every Friday. You're simply participating. And that matters because one of the biggest enemies of ordinary investors isn't a lack of intelligence. It's emotion. When the market is soaring, people feel confident. They want to invest more. They start believing they're geniuses. Then the market drops 20%. Suddenly, the exact same investments they loved 6 months earlier look terrifying. The headlines start screaming about recession. People start predicting another crash. Someone on television says this could be the beginning of a massive downturn. And your brain says, get out. This is where the $55 rule becomes more than a savings strategy. It becomes a behavioral strategy. Because you've already decided what you're going to do. Every week, $55 goes in. You don't have to make a fresh emotional decision every Friday. The system makes the decision for you. And that's incredibly valuable. Because some of the worst investment decisions happen when people make permanent moves based on temporary emotions. They sell after the market has already fallen. Then they wait for things to feel safe. But by the time everything feels safe again, prices may already have recovered. That's how people end up selling low and buying high. The $55 rule tries to take you out of that emotional cycle. You don't need to know what the market will do next month. You need to know what you're going to do every month for the next 20 or 30 years. That's a completely different question. And here's where the rule gets even more powerful. Your $55 doesn't have to stay $55 forever. In fact, I don't want it to. Think about what happens when you get a raise. Let's say you currently earn $60,000. Then your employer gives you a 4% raise. Your income goes up. Now imagine increasing your weekly investment from $55 to $60. You probably won't feel a dramatic difference in your lifestyle. But your future will notice. Then maybe you get another raise 2 years later. Increase it again. Maybe you receive a tax refund. Instead of immediately spending the entire refund, you invest part of it. Maybe you pay off your car. Instead of allowing that old car payment to magically become a restaurant budget, redirect some of it toward investing. This is how the $55 rule evolves. It starts as a tiny habit. Then your income increases. Your contribution increases. Your investments grow. And eventually, the amount your portfolio produces can become much larger than the amount you started with. That's when the snowball really starts moving. But I want you to notice something. None of this requires you to become obsessed with money. You don't need to watch CNBC every morning. You don't need to check your portfolio during your lunch break. You don't need to understand every Federal Reserve announcement. You don't need to know where the S&P 500 will close tomorrow. In fact, constantly checking your investments can make things worse. Imagine putting $55 into your account on Friday. You check Monday. The market is down. You're nervous. You check Tuesday. It's down again. Now you're questioning the entire plan. But if you checked 6 months later, the emotional noise would be gone. This is why long-term investing requires a strange combination of action and patience. You have to act consistently. Then you have to stop interfering. That's difficult for human beings. We like immediate feedback. We like winning. We like knowing that what we're doing is working. But wealth building often doesn't give you that satisfaction. Sometimes the smartest financial decision feels boring. You drive the older car. You keep your housing costs reasonable. You invest automatically. You don't upgrade your lifestyle every time your paycheck increases. Nobody applauds you for it. But 20 years later, your bank account might. And that brings us to one of the most important ideas behind this entire strategy. The $55 rule isn't really about investing $55. It's about becoming the kind of person who pays their future self first. Because once that identity changes, other financial decisions start changing too. You begin looking at your paycheck differently. Instead of asking, "What can I afford this month?" you start asking, "How much of this paycheck can I turn into future freedom?" That's a completely different question. And it changes the way you think about raises. It changes how you think about bonuses. It changes how you think about tax refunds. It even changes how you think about spending. You don't have to stop enjoying your money. You just stop allowing every dollar to have only one destination, today. Some dollars are for today. Some are for emergencies. Some are for your home. Some are for experiences. And some are for the version of you who will be sitting here 20 or 30 years from now wondering whether you prepared enough. That future person deserves a vote too. And your $55 is one of the smallest votes you can cast. But don't make the mistake of thinking small means unimportant. A plane can be just a few degrees off course when it takes off and still end up hundreds of miles away from where it was supposed to land. Money works similarly. A small decision repeated for years can create an enormous difference in where you eventually arrive. And there is another thing I want you to understand before we move forward. The $55 rule isn't designed to replace an emergency fund. It isn't a reason to invest money you need for next month's rent. It isn't an excuse to ignore high-interest credit card debt. And it definitely isn't permission to invest money you cannot afford to lose in the short term. Your financial foundation still matters. If you have no emergency savings and a major unexpected bill would immediately force you onto a credit card, you have another problem to solve first. If you're carrying extremely expensive credit card debt, paying that down may be one of the highest return financial moves available to you. This is why building wealth isn't about following one rule blindly. It's about putting your money in the right order. Protect yourself first. Control expensive debt. Build a reasonable emergency cushion. Take advantage of valuable employer benefits and retirement options when appropriate. Then consistently invest for the long term. The $55 rule fits inside that larger system. It isn't magic. It is a habit. And habits become powerful when they are repeated for long enough. In part 3, we're going to talk about what can completely destroy this strategy even when someone is doing almost everything right. We're going to talk about market crashes, fees, lifestyle inflation, panic selling, and the surprisingly expensive mistakes people make while trying to build wealth. Because making the $55 contribution is easy. Keeping the strategy alive for 20 or 30 years? That's where the real game begins. Now, here's how people destroy the $55 rule. First, they panic. The market drops 20% and suddenly they stop investing or sell everything. Don't confuse a falling market with a broken strategy. If you're investing for decades, downturns are part of the journey. Your $55 is buying more shares when prices are lower. Second, fees. A 1% or 2% annual fee may sound tiny, but over decades it can cost you a serious amount of wealth. Look for diversified, low-cost investments and understand exactly what you're paying. Third, lifestyle inflation. You get a raise and immediately upgrade everything. Instead, increase your $55 alongside your income. Maybe $55 becomes $65, then $75, then $100. Your lifestyle can improve while your future improves too. Fourth, chasing quick money. One hot stock. One crypto tip. One a guaranteed opportunity. That's not investing. That's speculation. The $55 rule works because it removes the need to constantly be right. And don't forget taxes. If you're eligible, accounts like a 401k, Roth 401k, or Roth IRA can provide valuable tax advantages. And if your employer offers a 401k match, understand that benefit before leaving money on the table. But remember, your $55 should come after the basics are handled. Build an emergency fund. Pay down expensive debt. Protect yourself with appropriate insurance. Then consistently invest for the future. And if you're thinking, I'm already 40 or 50. I missed my chance, you haven't. Starting later means you have less time for compounding, but less time is not the same as no time. Start with $55. If that's too much, start with $25. Even $10. The number isn't sacred. The habit is. Then increase it whenever your income increases. Because the most dangerous sentence in personal finance is, I'll start later. Later is expensive. Every year you delay is another year your money doesn't get the opportunity to compound. And here's what I really want you to understand. The $55 rule isn't about becoming a millionaire from one magical trick. It's about buying future freedom with money that would otherwise disappear. That $55 could become part of your retirement. It could help pay for healthcare costs later. It could give you the ability to leave a job you hate. It could mean saying yes to a family trip without worrying about your checking account. It could simply give you the peace of knowing that future you isn't completely dependent on the next paycheck. That's real wealth. Not looking rich. Having options. So look at your own spending this week. Find your $55. Maybe it's takeout. Maybe it's subscriptions. Maybe it's impulse shopping. Maybe it's simply money that disappears because you never gave it a job. Then give it one. Automate it. Invest it appropriately. And let time do what time does best. Because $55 doesn't look powerful today. But repeated every week for decades? That's a completely different story. Your future doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be consistent. So here's my question for you. Where would your $55 come from? Drop it in the comments. And if you're ready to stop letting small amounts disappear and start turning them into long-term wealth, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.